Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to Lead with Worship, a worship podcast from the team here at Saddleback Church. My name is John Cassetto, and I get to be the global worship pastor here at Saddleback. On this podcast, you're going to hear from really great artists, creatives, and special guests as we uncover the heart and purpose of worship. Throughout our time together, our prayer is that you would be encouraged, inspired, and challenged in your own creative journey and worship leadership. You know, values are so critical to the health of a worship team, to a church, and really in any organization. But too often, values are written on the walls but not talked about in the halls. So today, you're going to hear from some of our worship leaders here at Saddleback as they discuss the team values of our worship ministry here and how those values are practically lived out in our church. We also wanted to resource you with those values, so you can find a link to download those in the description below. Now let's dive into today's conversation.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Lead with Worship. My name's Taylor and I'm on the worship staff with Saddleback Church, and I'm here today with my friends Socrates Perez and Temri Abadjan. Hey guys, how's it going?
Hey,
doing great.
Hey, yo, it's good to be with you guys. Sock and Tim are worship leaders at our broadcast campus in Lake Forest, California, and we're so excited to have them with us today. And I know that today we're going to explore some of the values that have shaped our ministry and our culture over the last several years. But before we dive into that, I would love just for people to know and to hear from you guys. Would you tell us a little bit about the worship cultures that you guys grew up in? Yeah, would love to hear that from you guys. Whoever wants to start.
Yeah, well, I grew up going to a church in Orlando that was musically we were more traditional, like hymns and big choir and all of that stuff. And then as I grew, we kind of got more into modern and contemporary worship. And so that was kind of the environment that I was in. But because of like choir being so prevalent, like I was involved in kids choirs and my parents were involved in choir. And so I just remember the opportunities to serve in that way. So they would just make a way at all ages for you to be able to engage.
Yeah.
And I think that, I think processes maybe looked a little bit different than I do now. And I honestly haven't thought about it in a long time, but yeah, I'm just really grateful that there was a way for me to stay engaged. And sometimes that was really easy and sometimes that was not as easy. I think about like in bands and things like that wasn't always super accessible to like play an instrument at an entry level when there's these like amazing pros that you're trying to play alongside. So a lot of times it was just, I'm just going to be around and attend rehearsal. I'm glad that they let me just be there and watch them, you know?
Yeah. So what were you doing a lot of that time? Were you like singing, like when you were able to be involved, like growing up, or was that more playing, like where band wasn't?
Yeah, it was more
accessible?
singing. But then when I think about like playing in the big services, like that was more just watching. And, and I'd watch, the drummer or the keyboard player and I'd try to like learn what I could from them, but also like on the side, just get better so that hopefully one day they'd hear me play. And but we had a great youth ministry band, and that was also just really instrumental for me to be able to learn those skills and try and fail and keep learning. Yeah,
I love that.
Yeah,
I grew up in just the expressions I grew up in. Our worship was, I feel like, really central to our expression and just like even our weekend gatherings and I'm really grateful that even as like a kid, I was welcomed into like those spaces, and I got to the church that I was at until I was in about 5th grade was like, I was like in big church with my parents during praise and worship and stuff. And so getting to be part of the atmosphere and just see what happens in that space really helped like shape and form me and my faith and my connection to worship. And the church where I grew up, well, I spent like most of my years and where I actually started serving in worship. It was around junior high that I actually, like, I got to start singing in choir in big church, and even like started singing on a microphone in big church, which was like it really, just the fact that I'm looking back and thinking like, wow, the fact that there was just like space for me, even just like what Socrates was saying, to start, like exercising those gifts at such a young age is really awesome. And our junior high and high school ministries had like live teams. And we did a lot of Hillsong, a lot of, my worship pastors were really connected with like the movement that was happening in the UK, like Vineyard Movement and Soul Survivor, and like Matt Redman and Tim Hughes, and a lot of that music coming out of the UK. And so we did a lot of that. And it wasn't unfamiliar to me or like foreign to me to be in like worship spaces that were not just that kind of moved outside of the plan. So the worship leader may have planned these 3 or 4 songs for the worship set, but it wasn't unusual for us to move outside of that and for our worship pastor to lead us in what now we is well known as like spontaneous moments.
Sure.
And so I grew up with that just being like really familiar. But man, I think about like the fact that we didn't have planning center back then. Like now it's like, right. How do we,
so funny.
What do we do without planning
true.
center? But I think about these guys and musicians and singers that like, they just showed up after church on a Wednesday or after work on a Wednesday night for service to play, or even Sunday morning. They just plain Joe people working normal, and they just show up, and they were like, in my eyes, I'm like, they were incredible, and they just showed up ready to go. They may not have even known what the songs were going to be, up until like that morning. And then it's like, let's go. And it was always really awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. I love like
without planning center.
Without planning center.
How did we do it?
What would we do? I remember like even like as young as I am, I still remember like getting like my music like in the mail and like CDs and like
oh my gosh,
isolated. And I'm just like, I'm thinking about that and I'm like, oh my goodness, how did we do this? Like without, and
we used to ship music.
We used to ship music. Like, oh my goodness. Praise God for Planning Center. Love them. Man, I love like the space though that was there, Tammy. Like that's so beautiful that like there was just such space for you to like just be invited and be involved. And then the fact too, like for you, Sock, like that was just part of the culture too, that even if the platform wasn't quite as accessible yet, like just your presence was welcomed there. You know, there wasn't like this exclusivity sort of thing. But yeah, thanks for sharing that, guys. I love hearing like where our people come from, because it's just like just such a variety of different places and spaces and environments that just formed you guys and shaped into the leaders that you are today for us. And so grateful for that. Thinking about our house today, we have here at Saddleback Church, we have 5 worship values that shape us. And if you've ever been around Saddleback Church for any amount of time or encountered us at all in any space, you know that we absolutely love acrostics. It's just like part of our DNA for some reason, like just stemming from Pastor Rick and the way that we teach things and the way that we remember things. And so naturally, worship is the same way. And the acrostic, like all of the values, the first letter of the value spell out the word worship. And so those 5 values are: welcome new team members, one team, reject negativity, share everything, high level of skill in every area, implement new processes with joy, and pray continuously. Those are our values. And so love those. Those are the tenets of our team and that we've been living out as a culture for a long time now. And I'd love to start with, Tamara, you've been here for a number of years now. How many years have you been at Saddleback now?
I just celebrated 8 years.
8 years at Saddleback. I love that. 8 years. Let's go. Yes, let's go. I'd be curious just to know from your perspective, because you were here when these values were implemented, how have you seen these shape the culture of our, the worship culture of our church and our team over the time that you've been here?
Oh my gosh. Well, I think just like with anything new, it's a little clunky at first, right? Like it's not When you're used to something one way for so long, I think change can be hard. I think seeing something new on paper or hearing something for the first time and not really having a context for it can just be hard, you know? And I don't know that a lot of people were necessarily on board, not because of bad attitudes or anything, but just because it's just new. It's just change. It's again, no context for it.
Sure.
So it can be a little clunky at first. And so there's, just a few people who are bearing these values and trying to, implement these values, from a staff level to the volunteers. And for a while, I remember, especially in my beginning years, it was just a thinner team, and it was all about pouring into those few people these things. I mean, I can see how these things were these values before they were actually an acrostic, how we were trying to be them prior to them being on paper, this is who we are, these are our values. But I think the biggest game changer with anything, when God gives you a vision for something, is starting to be it versus just saying this is who we are, this is this is what we John, obviously John, the Lord gave John a vision for who we were supposed to be. And so I think just starting to, it only started with a few of us, like I said, just
Sure.
carrying that, but just starting to be that versus just saying that this is who we are and this is who we want to be. The game changer is just being them, starting to live them out, even when it's even when there's the tension of, well, this is who we are right now, but this is who we want to be. And there's growing pains in that for sure.
Yeah.
But it's just figuring out how to be them in little ways, and then eventually those little ways become normal, and then you just start becoming these things over time.
What are some of those little ways that you've seen? Because I think there's so much to that, Timmery, of you've seen these. There's growing pains to that for sure, and for anyone who's implementing values, or even if they haven't, maybe you have these values or have values, but they're not lived out. There's growing pains to that.
Well, I think so. For instance, I think even just something as simple as if a value is that we love each other, let's just say we love each other, okay? So if we all love each other, that's great to say that, but how do we actually love each other practically? So in a weekend experience, for instance, how do I love my brother Connor who's serving in production well, and vice versa, or a stage manager? It's we talk about the currency of love being information, for instance. So Planning Center started to become that hub of, we're giving each other lots of information because we love each other and we want to set each other up for a win for the weekend service or in our respective areas of serving. So I think about that. It's just
That's good.
Those are simple, really baby steps. If you're saying this is who we are, that was a great step forward for us.
Yeah.
And I would say I think that's a perfect example, Timmery, because when we when we talk about loving through information and through sharing and communicating with one another, we basically so one of the values is sharing everything, right? Share everything.
Yeah.
And when you state those values that you believe in your heart, you believe this is the team that we want to be, and so I'm going to write it down, share everything. Then you start to see what processes or what practical things are maybe falling short of that ideal. And so you start to go get into a production meeting where you're well, I feel I had difficulty with my in-ears this weekend, and then whoever's doing in-ears says, well, I actually didn't realize that, or I didn't know that, and it wasn't communicated to me. And so you start realizing, oh man, is there a process there in place where we can communicate that better to one another, where we can say like, okay, I'm not going to go through this the whole weekend like feeling that without talking about it. I'm going to have let's have a place. Maybe let's establish a time during our run through when we're actually communicating that with one another, when we're actually going to say, okay, is everything going well with your ears? Let's have a checkpoint and all that stuff. So it helps you because you realize like, oh yeah, my heart is definitely to share everything.
Yeah.
But there are places where like that's difficult because maybe we haven't intentionally thought up a practical way to do that.
Yeah.
And so your values start to help you realize like, okay, these are the areas that falls short. What can I do? What can we brainstorm and do as a team together to help meet that expectation?
I feel like they values really expose you in some ways. Like, I love that you pointed that out. I remember part of my story is I was a campus worship leader for a time at one of our regional locations. And I remember when I got there, they had just been without leadership for a time. And there was a lot of the values that we'd held for years that really weren't being lived out in this particular campus and this particular team. And so really those values helped expose us in different ways. And it was good growing pains for the team that I was a part of there. Because I could point to things like us being one team. I could point to things like reject negativity and be like, I don't see us doing this well. I see us, accepting negativity through gossip, not going directly to the people, but actually in our team, we practice Matthew 18 and we go to people directly to resolve conflict. Like Tamara, you said, we communicate love through information a lot of times. And so having that exchange and pointing us to we're not a team that's going to be frantic, but we're going to be a team that's going to be prayerful in everything that we do and everything that we seek. And so to watch those shape and mold my team and grow my team to be more like Christ and to be more in tune with the Holy Spirit and to lean in more was really powerful, and it exposed us in a lot of ways. Like you said, Sock. Yeah, for sure.
That's cool.
That's true. I think another example of that would be like, there's that welcome new team members value is the W, and we can easily like say we desire to be a welcoming team. Like, arms open, anybody's welcome to come and be a part of this team. But then when you realize like, how do I live that value out, you realize, people don't really know how to step foot into our team and how to engage. And so what are we doing and saying in our like rhythm to invite people into that, whether it's like making some sort of call to say like, we're looking for people to serve in our team, to, okay, when they say they want to serve, what next? Like, how do they get engaged?
Yeah, the process of it.
Is there an audition in place, or is there just a pathway for them to access serving through our team? It's one thing to say like, oh yeah, my heart's open. And it's another thing to like actually welcome well and make a way for people to access the team.
Absolutely. That's super good. Yeah. You guys have any like favorites, like looking at our list of values and the things that like we have to like live, that we commit ourselves to living out? Any that like stick out to you that, gosh, I really love this particular value that we get to lean into as a team?
When I
choose?
see, I know
How do you choose?
it is hard, but I like when I think of one team, I look at that value and I think of like how hard we've worked for that value and how much like I'm aware of other church environments that there is such a disconnect between like different aspects of the worship team. So like platform and production, for instance, like I know that there's such a gap in so many other church environments between, just all the people that make weekend worship happen or just make, a worship team happen, and how hard like we fought to be one team. Like I think of it on a single campus level, but I think of it on like a just even like a Southern California campus level, and how, gosh, it just feels that one team is something that we are more now than I've ever experienced before. And so I would say that one, just because of how much like we have fought for that,
Yeah.
and how hard it's been in previous seasons, and that's been more kind of pointing back to what I was saying before. It's something that you're like, that's when you used to look at and be like, okay, we will be that one day. We just have to keep like, pushing through and like taking ground in somewhat. But now it's like, I feel like we really are that.
Yeah.
It took a long time, but
Sure.
Yeah, I think that like that just reminds me how I feel like I've heard John and maybe others say that like a lot of these were written and spoken before like we really were them. Some of them were like a reflection of like, this is who we are and I want to notate that. But also some of them was just like, this is who we need to be and we're not quite that right now.
Yeah.
And just the continually like having it in front of us as a way of like, okay, I really feel like God's calling us to be one team. Like helped form us into that. Through some hard conversations where it's like, are we really valuing one another well in that way? Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's good.
There's a faith element to that, I think, for sure, of like believing God for like what you're not seeing yet, like in your church or in your team. And gosh, like I just can't help but like think about like people who are probably listening to this and worship leaders who are trying to maybe carry these things out like in their own context, where maybe there is a gap, between the platform and the production, maybe the team's not loving each other well. Maybe there is some disunity, and gosh, like just keep going, I think is what I would say.
absolutely.
Yeah. Like you keep going, like keep believing God for what he can do, that God's able to accomplish more than you could ever ask or imagine in your team, and keep believing in faith. And you're not alone in that, even though you might feel like that, in some particular seasons.
Yeah.
But
amen.
yeah.
Amen.
Absolutely. I think I had some questions about some particular values too. I look at like high level of skill in every area. We see that from scripture. But I think about like our church and our context, and we love to invite volunteers to empower them to do the work of ministry, equip the saints to do the work of ministry. What does that particular value look like when we're inviting volunteers? We want a high level of skill. I think about like the conflict that you grew up in, Sock, of like there's professional musicians, but figuring out what does access to ministry and serving my church look like for me? What does that look like for us?
Yeah, I think that for us, the first thing that comes to my mind, I feel like there's multiple implementations of it, but the first thing that comes to my mind is just how well like our musicians, our band members, like our music directors, they're spending time and investing and thinking through like how do we do workshops for musicians, and that's a way of helping to just say like, I know that we're not all at this like super high level of skill necessarily, but I want to help you take the next step. I want to help you grow just a little bit further in your skill from where you are. And I think that communicates so much value to the people that come to those workshops or to the people that engage with our team, because somebody thinks they're worth like investing in. And so it's looked different over different seasons, and it's in some ways a little bit fresh still, like in the last few years that we've been doing that, last 2 or 3 years. But we have, sometimes it looks like it's a Thursday night and someone's there with a keyboard and there's another keyboard next to that person. And so like I had the opportunity to do that recently. I had a keyboard, had another keyboard next to me. There were like 20 keyboard players. And I shared a little bit about like underscore and how, what do we do under someone who's speaking, whether they're doing announcements and maybe it's more energetic, or they're praying and it's a little bit more reflective, and how do like we think through all that and then just get to do that alongside other people. So part like class training and part like, let's try it together. And so they'll come up and play on the keyboard next to me, and then someone else will come to my keyboard, and just like little seeds that you can plant of like, here are some things to be thinking about and to work on your own time. But just, I think it helps communicate the value of like, we don't want to stay where we are in our skill of what we're offering in worship. We want to go from strength to strength, from strong to stronger, and take another step forward. And we believe that you can do that even whatever level you're at.
That's really good.
Yeah.
I love that. You had something you wanted to say, Tim?
Yeah, I was just thinking
Yeah.
about the fact that how often I'm seeing, back at front of house or, even like a video volunteer, how often I'm seeing someone who's a little more seasoned right behind someone who is learning. And like how often I'm seeing just someone being trained, mentored. It's so cool. It's just like that's who we are. That's our environment. There's just there is space to grow. I think that, like Socrates said, it's just that's our. I think even as a staff, like that's an aim, is to just like constantly be growing, and I just love seeing that model of like, or even like in choir, for instance. I think about how cool it is that you've got someone who's just kind of learning harmony parts standing next to someone who's just like totally killer and has got harmonies, on lock, and how much like them just even standing together, they sharpen one another, they help each other grow. One person's always learning from the next person, and I love that kind of environment that we have.
Yeah.
It's cool.
That's cool. I love that you pointed that out. We see that play out through so many different facets. I'm just thinking about like today. I was in the office and like there's interns like looking over the shoulder of people like who are building Ableton sessions,
Yeah.
And like even at
cool.
so many different levels, like we see that being played out, and just the openness to that of inviting people into the work of ministries is so great. We got to hit this one because I feel like this is Saddleback heart and soul, but implement new processes with joy. I feel like this value like creates so much flexibility in our team. Why does that matter? Like why do we need that value, and how do you see it play out in our church?
Yeah, I think that this past year, I feel like we've all, not just at Saddleback, we've all had to live in that value of new ways of doing things,
Yeah.
in a new way of doing ministry in a season where COVID has caused us to sometimes do, like for a lot of churches, they're doing online for the first time. And what does that look like? Or for us right now, we're in a season of transition from being in an outdoor venue to an indoor venue. And so moving outdoors just means so many processes that we have to shift from having something that's set up and set and you lock the door and everything's good, to some setup and tear down elements, or some like cover up instruments and put them away, and soundboards, stuff like that. So I don't know. It's very relevant, I think, to this season, not just for us, but for lots of other churches. And and for us, it's just a value of like, if we're called, whether it's the circumstances or our leadership, whether it's Pastor Rick or John, just saying, man, I really feel like God's calling us to try things a little bit differently and move in this direction for a season. And like it for a minute, let's go for it. And it may not be forever, but for us to have a posture that leads with a yes, that's a common phrase in our team, to lead with a yes, that just says, okay, you're like, I trust your heart in this. I trust you enough to follow and to go there with you joyfully. And then also at the same time, like we can honestly assess, as we go through it, after we're trying things, like, okay, is there a better way to try this? Is there another process that might be a little bit better that we can talk through together? But it's a common thing for us here at Saddleback to just be trying new ways of doing things that can be the most effective way of reaching people, of inviting people into an atmosphere of worship, and so on.
Yes.
Yeah, I was telling you guys before we started today, like I've got my notes here that I've had for over 5 years now, that I've used over the years when we've done like a purpose-driven church conference breakout and talked about our worship values and stuff like that. And I mean, if you guys could see these two pieces of papers are super tattered and have been through it.
They're
but
well
it's
loved.
they're well loved. But like this sheet of paper, this particular printout of these values is 5 years old. And I loved that as a reminder today that like our values don't change, but, and this is like who we are now, which is really cool, but our values don't change, but how we flesh them out certainly does and can.
Yeah.
In different seasons, in different weeks, in different moments of, a weekend worship. The first thing that came to my mind was this is just one small example, but, this last year, of course, being at home, we still are a team who's welcoming new team members and, looking after our choir. Currently with our choir director, we had to figure out how to still audition people and welcome new people into choir. And so, we had to implement a new process of virtual choir auditions. And, that was just one example that comes to my mind, but
and we still had people, right?
Like, and we still had people
jumping in, wanting to be part of it.
Yeah, it's like we're not even really singing together at all, but we had people that wanted to be part of the community aspect, and so who were singers, and so I just love that. I love that it's just like these values don't change, but we change like how we flesh them out according to times and seasons, and it's not always initially with joy, but then you like get there.
Yeah. I'm so glad you went. I'm so glad you went there though, Temery, because like I was gonna go there, and I was thinking about that over the past year and a half or so, especially like just being in Southern California and the restrictions in here and the different things that we had to navigate through the season of COVID. It was like seeing like our team like implement new processes and do new things. It was just, everything was just like, not a problem. Whatever we can do. How can we make this happen? How can we serve our people, And not just on that front, but like on every front of so much change. The way we did things changed, but like at the end of the day, to magnify the Lord and to live these things out that he's called us to live out, like that, those things just did not change at all, like who we are. And it's a season where so many things were shaken, and so many things were, so many things like fell to the wayside. I feel like in a lot of different ways, like our team was just committed to these things, and to see that lived out was just so beautiful. And sometimes it's unnatural, like you said, Temery. Sometimes you have to like lean into that and choose to be that. You have to choose to be a team that prays continuously. You have to choose to be a team that walks with joy and change. You have to choose to be a team that's going to grow in different areas. So I love that you went there.
I think that it can be hard when it's something that has been working too, like a process that's like actually been working. But like reevaluating or reassessing, like, okay, this might be working, but is it moving us forward anymore? Like, is this, just like giving yourself the space to even like reevaluate processes or reassess, like, sometimes it is even good things.
Yeah.
So it's not always like this isn't working and therefore we have to implement a new process. Sometimes it's like, okay, we need to put everything out on the table, and it's a good thing, but is it like the best? Are we doing it the best way we can? Or,
Yeah. That's good. Man, I love the open-handedness of that. Well, guys, this has been so good, and thank you so much for sitting with us today. But I would just love to give you guys one more opportunity. If just thinking about the people who are on the other side of this podcast, the worship leader that's listening, the person who's a volunteer in their church, and just leaning into this podcast today, what would you have just a parting word of encouragement for them as maybe they're trying to implement values, maybe they're trying to shape their worship culture towards something, towards the new thing that God's calling them to, or maybe they're just trying to live them out as a volunteer. What would you have to say to them?
I think it's the P in worship in this acrostic is praying continuously. And really when I think of that value, I think of the fact that we are partnering with God. One of our church values is every member is a minister.
Yeah.
And so we're helping others be mobilized into ministry. And I think it can be hard to look at like other teams or other churches, see how they're doing things and want those same things. But I think it's really important that you posture yourself in just such a way where you're an open vessel once again, and recognizing the fact that this is a partnership between you and the Holy Spirit, and He has a vision specifically for you and for your team, and He will give it to you if you ask Him, and He will send the right people to help flesh that out and make it become a reality at the right time in the right season. You may feel alone in it right now, but continually pray, and He will send the team. He will send the right people who will carry that vision with you. And eventually those things that you're going to write down as the vision that He's given you are going to be the things that you become. Your team is going to be those things at some point in time. I believe that.
Yeah.
That's good.
That's so good, Temry. And we need to hear that. We need to be reminded of that, because some points along the way we get thinking like, okay, we're doing pretty well at this, and it's by our strength, and then maybe we hit a bump and it's like, oh shoot, I forgot that I'm supposed to be depending on the Lord, like to know what to be doing next, to know which direction to lead the team, to know and trust that He's going to provide everything that we need to fulfill the call He's given us. So that's really good. I think about I guess just a reminder, like an encouragement to remind your team members and remind yourself that this is all like an act of serving, and serving requires humility, and it requires looking out for others' interests above your own sometimes. And I mean, yes, above your own, period. Philippians, in Philippians 2, that's what Paul says. He says, let each of you not look not to your own interests, but to the interests of others. And as I was looking through this list of the values and back to the one team value, there's one of the bullet points that we have that says like the tech teams will work diligently to make the artists sound and look their very best. Artists will work diligently to honor the hard work and service of the tech team. And at some point, like the lines can get like, it can get twisted sometimes where we're like on stage, if you're a platform person or if you're a worship leader, and all these lights are on you and you're getting all these compliments after service, and you're just like, oh man, I'm amazing. And why am I frustrated right now because someone's not serving me well? Well, we should never be in that mentality. Like we should always have the mentality of, I'm here to serve, not to be served. I'm here. How can I serve the people that are in front of me that I'm leading in worship, but also how can I serve the people that I do ministry with? And how can I look out for their interests and think maybe through a different lens that I don't normally think through, of like, how is this action impacting or helping or hurting them? So I don't know, just a reminder that we're in the business of serving, people, and we do it in a way that's like, that looks sometimes like the way the world elevates people that do concerts and stuff like that. But we shouldn't let that get us switched up in our minds for what we're here to do, and that's to serve.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good. Sock Tim, thank you so much for being with us today. Really, really appreciate it. And yeah, we'll see you guys next time on the podcast.
Well, I really hope that conversation with Socrates and Timmery and Taylor really blessed you and encouraged you today. You know, one of the things that stood out to me, I love that Timmery shared that phrase. She said that our values don't change, but how we live them out can shift and change. For sure. I mean, I think about our years here at Saddleback Worship, and just our values have been so consistent for nearly a decade now, just written out and official. But the way we've expressed those has certainly taken on different forms over the years. So I'm really glad that you were able to hear that great conversation from those three really trusted teammates here. Well, you know, you can stay connected with us in a few different ways. First of all, stay up to date with Saddleback Worship's original music wherever you stream your music. Also, we'd love to hear from you. So we love to hear your questions, episode ideas, and ways we can serve you. So just email us. And lastly, this podcast is just one of the many podcasts produced by Saddleback Church. We have the Doable Discipleship podcast, The Well, and more. So be sure to check out those links in the episode description as well. We're really glad we got to spend some time with you today, and we'll see you next time on Lead with Worship.